So hi for the third time. Welcome to our webinar, Managing Informed Consents for Clinical Trials. My name is Petra Jerković. I am Client Relationship Manager at Data Privacy Manager. And before we start, let me give you a quick overview of our Data Privacy Manager solution. Data Privacy Manager is a comprehensive privacy solution for personal data management, and it is an innovative software as a service platform developed and hosted in European Union. It is designed to solve specific privacy challenges that include data subject requests, data processing inventory, data discovery, third-party management, and much more. But today in this webinar, we will discuss how Data Privacy Manager can be a comprehensive solution for managing informed consents and addressing challenges from business, compliance, ethics, and technical perspectives. As we all know, the use of patient data in clinical trials is heavily regulated, and proper management of informed consents is essential to ensure compliance with privacy regulations and ethical standards. And you will learn more about that topic today. Today's agenda consists of this short introduction, presentation, and Q&A session. So feel free to write all of your questions you have during the presentation in the chat, and we will answer all of that questions at the end. Now I would like to introduce Marijan Bračić. He is a DPM product owner. He is a highly experienced professional with over 15 years of experience in the fields of data management and data protection. He is highly knowledgeable in the areas of compliance and consents management. Today, Marijan will share his knowledge with all of you, and he will talk more about how to manage informed consents for clinical trials. Marijan, over to you.
Petra, thank you very much, and hello everyone. I'm very glad we have this webinar, and we are going to talk about managing informed consents, what is important, how to do it, what are the challenges, and how we can offer a solution for having a central source of truth, but also a way and processes around properly managing everything regarding compliance and ethics when it comes to collecting and using data from clinical trials. So let me give you an overview of what we are going to talk about. I plan to make this casual. We want to have a Q&A and probably a discussion in the end, so feel free to ask any questions. And if anything is not clear of what I'm going to present, just let me know, and I'll try to use the time before the end of the webinar to answer all the questions. So what we are going to do is I'm going to give an introduction to informed consents in clinical trials, defining what informed consent is and why it is so important for clinical trials. Then talking about legal and ethical considerations in obtaining informed consent, reviewing the regulations and ethical principles that govern obtaining informed consent in clinical trials, including the role of institutional review boards. Then I'm going to talk about challenges in managing patient consent and how Data Privacy Manager helps. This is something where I have much more experience, and this is something I hope is going to be relevant for you. Then we're going to talk about consent, managing consents in Data Privacy Manager, and reviewing best practices for documenting and managing informed consents, including the use of electronic consent forms and importance of maintaining accurate and complete records. Then we are briefly going to talk about responsible use of clinical trial data, which is very important, and many initiatives when it comes to implementing new consent mastering systems come from today's need to have good data for AI machine learning models, and to make sure that the data is used in an ethical way. And in the end, we're going to have a Q&A and discussion. So today I want to discuss how Data Privacy Manager's consent and preference management module can help you effectively manage consents in your organization. Why consents are important in the pharmaceutical industry? They play a critical role in the industry when it comes to obtaining necessary consents from patients, because it's a legal requirement, and failure to comply can actually result in severe consequences, including legal action, fines, and reputational damage. Additionally, managing consents can be time-consuming and resource-intensive, making it essential to have an efficient and effective consent management process in place. So with Data Privacy Manager, we're going to go into how we actually manage consents, how we store records of consent, how we collect consents, and how we make the data available to all consuming systems, which can be, for example, analytical systems and adverse event reporting, and actually doing all that is needed regarding clinical data, genetic data, non-genetic samples of data when it comes to the trials itself. So we have designed DPM to simplify and streamline consent management process, and it will enable you to easily capture and manage consent preferences from patients, to maintain a complete and auditable record of all consent interactions, to automate consent renewal and withdrawal processes. And we can start now by discussing very briefly what informed consent is and why it is so important for clinical trials, before we talk about how we can help with data privacy management. So informed consent is a process by which individuals are fully informed about the purpose, risks, benefits, and alternatives of a medical or research intervention, and are given the opportunity to voluntarily decide whether or not to participate. In the context of clinical trials, informed consent is particularly important because it ensures that participants understand the nature of the study and what their participation entails. Informed consent is important for several reasons. First and foremost, it is an ethical requirement that protects the rights and welfare of research participants. It also ensures that participants make an informed decision about whether or not to participate, based on a clear understanding of the study's purpose, procedures, risks, and benefits. Additionally, informed consent is a legal requirement for conducting clinical trials and obtaining regulatory approval. And finally, obtaining informed consent can also help build trust and transparency between researchers and participants, which is important for the success of clinical trials. So when we talk about best practices for collecting informed consent, we need to make sure to have the following. You need to ensure that consent process is voluntary. So participants must be fully informed about the study and have the right to decline participation without penalty. Also, it is very important to provide adequate time for participants to review the consent form. So you also need to obtain written consent from the patients. You need to address privacy concerns. So the reason why we started actually 7 years ago working and building Data Privacy Manager is because privacy is very difficult to manage. And when it comes to pharmaceutical industry and clinical trials, there is a big angle from privacy perspective about how data collected through the clinical trials and consent for using the data when patients are enrolled in the studies, how it needs to be managed. So it is very important that consent form should explain how participants' data will be collected, stored, and shared. And participants should also be informed of their rights to access and control their data. Also, when it comes to best practices for collecting informed consent, you need to ensure that consent process is culturally sensitive. You need to be very, very careful when obtaining consent from vulnerable populations. And you need to make sure to conduct ongoing informed consent trainings. So the next topic I want to also briefly touch upon is the legal and ethical considerations in obtaining informed consent. And obtaining consent in clinical trials is governed by several regulations and ethical principles, including the role of institutional review boards, or IRBs, and regulatory agencies such as the FDA. It can present several ethical dilemmas related to autonomy and beneficence. And autonomy refers to the ability of individuals to make their own decisions based on their values and preferences. Informed consent is designed to protect autonomy by ensuring that participants have a clear understanding of the risks and benefits of a study and can make an informed decision about whether or not to participate in the study. However, there are situations where autonomy can be compromised, such as when participants are unable to understand the information provided. So from this perspective, it's very, very important to have an ethical review of the language in the informed consent forms, or ICFs. So what is communicated with the individual, with the patient, should be reviewed. And for research companies in the pharmaceutical industry, which can be global, which can be big, which can operate in many different regions, using many different languages for consent forms. And then again, you will change the content of the ICF, or the informed consent form, from time to time. So you will have different versions, and then in different languages in different countries. So it's very, very important to have this ethical review process in place, where you are actually going to be controlling what is communicated with the patients. And this is related to the autonomy part. Beneficence refers to the obligation to maximize benefits and minimize harm. Informed consent is designed to protect beneficence by ensuring that participants are fully informed about the risks and benefits of a study, and the study is designed in a way that maximizes benefits and minimizes harms. However, there are again situations where beneficence can be compromised, such as when the risks of a study are not fully understood, or when there is a pressure to enroll participants quickly, which can happen sometimes. In these cases, extra protections may be needed to ensure that participants are not subjected to unnecessary risks, and that the study is designed in a way that maximizes the benefits and minimizes harm. Other ethical dilemmas that can arise when obtaining informed consent include issues related to confidentiality, privacy, and transparency. And participants must be informed about how their data will be used and protected, and any potential conflicts of interest must be disclosed. Researchers must also be transparent about any financial interests they have in the study, of any relationships they might have with study sponsors. So, furthermore, regarding legal and ethical considerations, the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, or ICH, has developed guidelines for obtaining informed consents in clinical trials, which are widely adopted by regulatory agencies around the world. These guidelines require that informed consents be obtained in writing, and that participants be provided with a clear, understandable explanation of the study's purpose, procedures, risks, and benefits. In the US, for example, the FDA has established regulations governing informed consents in clinical trials. And these regulations require that informed consent be obtained in accordance with the principles of the Belmont Report, which outlines ethical principles for human research. The Belmont Report identifies three core principles: respect for persons, Beneficence and justice. Respect for persons requires that individuals be treated as autonomous agents and that those with diminished autonomy be provided with extra protections. Beneficence requires that researchers maximize benefits and minimize risks, and justice requires that the benefits and burdens of research be fairly distributed. So to ensure the compliance with these regulations and ethical principles, clinical trials must be reviewed and approved by an IRB, and their role is to review study protocols and informed consent documents to ensure that the study is ethical, scientifically sound, and that risks are minimized and benefits maximized. So what I want to talk about is moving from the theoretical part is what are the actual challenges when it comes to practical and technical management and mastering of consents for clinical trial studies. So we can start by talking about the challenge. And the challenge will be very often with pharmaceutical companies that you need to take into account a lot of parameters, a lot of different information about the consents, about the studies, about the product, about the types of data, about the countries where you are doing studies, about the language in which you are communicating with the individuals, about the number of researchers and type of researchers and how you are going to share data with them, about the use of data, what you want to do with the data apart from the core clinical trial, and so on. So it's very important to collect consents with complex configuration. Sometimes maybe you are not even able to use the data before you publish a specific number of studies, of scientific studies, of papers related to the study itself. Then we need to take into account that consents are typically collected from multiple collection points. Sometimes from the healthcare providers or healthcare professionals, sometimes from the patients themselves. And again, it can be around the world using different systems. Sometimes they will be fully digital in an electronic form, sometimes maybe not even that. Then you need to take into account that you are collecting information and consents from subjects in different countries and regions with different culture, with different language. You need to take that into account. And also later you need to be able to take into account and you need to know from which country or from which region the patient is coming, because some countries will have different privacy laws, for example, different regulations about what you can actually do with the data and how you can process the data. Also, we often see that the integration of these different consent collection points and the database, the repository, the store of consents and the patient level records will have a point-to-point integration, which is very difficult to maintain in the long run. And typically, consents will not be centralized and mastered. When we speak about mastering consents, we are speaking about mastering consent data. So are you aware, do you have like reporting capabilities? Do you know which consents are related to which ICF, to which study, to which product, to which organizational department, to which country? What is the language that was communicated, what is the version of the consent, and being able to have the patient level information in one place where you can at any point know exactly which consents are active, which are withdrawn, and that they are related to a specific purpose, to a specific study, and exactly what you want to do with the data later. And also, typically, the synchronization of consents is not immediate across all systems. So there is typically a lag. Maybe you need to wait for a day, maybe even more. But it is also very, very big challenge for companies because you are never sure at one point in time, do you have up-to-date and correct information, and what you can actually do with the data. And this is, in today's time, we all know that it's all going to be about AI and machine learning in the next couple of years, and specifically in the healthcare industry and pharmaceutical industry. There is so many really startups, products, ideas, and a lot of those are coming actually from the pharmaceutical industry, because when you have a lot of data collected through the clinical trials, you really can do a lot with the data, but you need to make sure that you are satisfying all the ethical and legal components. So the challenges I have mentioned are all present, and everyone who wants to use data, but who wants to use data in a responsible way, will feel all these challenges. So what is the solution? The solution that we are offering with Data Privacy Manager, for sure, it covers the technical part, it covers the process, and it provides a central consent management system as the starting point. It enables consent data mastering. So you are able to store any information when it comes to patient records, anything that is necessary, including the identifiers of the patient, what have they consented for, where are they coming from, what country, what was the language communicated to the patients, is there a product that is related to the study, and anything else. Really, it can even be all the clinical data. Everything can be stored here in a very secure way, but the point is that it is very flexible, and the mastering provides you with the capabilities to add any kind of information, anything that will be relevant either for reporting or responsible use of data after collecting patient-level consents. Also, DPM as the central store of truth will store current and historical consent records, and will connect all the data or consents coming from the same individual. It will be, and it is integrated with all consent collection points. So whichever way you use, whichever consent channel you consume, it will be best if it is connected to one single source of truth. In that way, you will always know what is the current status, the current version of consent on the patient level. The solution is also integrated with all data processing, using consent as the lawful basis. This is typically a requirement coming from the privacy world, from privacy compliance, where for everything you do when it comes to processing personal data, in this case, this is sensitive data, you need to do a proper data protection impact assessment. But the bottom line is that you will need to have the definition of the processing activities and the lawful basis and purpose, why you are doing it, what is the what will be the result. And in the same time, you need to think about the rights of the patients and how you are going to be compliant with the privacy regulation. And the solution also needs to have low latency information exchange. That means that you don't have to wait for 1-2 days or a week before you can be sure that the records are correct and the status of the informed consent is up to date. And finally, the solution must provide you with accurate information whenever and wherever needed. So from one perspective, you need to know actually why the consents are, what consents are collected for, what is the purpose, so that is why. You need to know who gave you consents, what is the current status, but you also need to make sure that any processing of data that happens later, during the course of the study, trials, or after it is done, you still have the data. You make sure that eventually You take care of the life cycle of the data. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But when you have the data, you also want to use the data, and you want to use it in a responsible way. So the central consent management platform will provide you with a way, with an automated way, to know and to feed data to the consuming systems in a way which will make sure that you are compliant and that you are actually using data responsibly. So what we do with DPM, I'm just going to give you like a high-level overview of what our company legit does and how data privacy manager typically fits into any enterprise. And this is not related just to the pharmaceutical industry. When we talk about data protection, privacy, compliance, and ethics, it is very universal. For sure, there are some specificities in different industries, especially in pharmaceuticals, but every industry processes personal data, and data protection regulation, privacy regulation applies to anyone processing personal data. So what we do is we do the implementation of DPM, and we have 4 different phases, 4 different products that we use, and one of them is consent and preference management, or consent mastering. So I'm going to drill into details about consent, of course, but we do other stuff. Also, what we very often do with every company that we start working for, we start with doing the state of privacy assessment, which is like very low investment, very quickly done, but it provides you with an objective overview of how you are technically secured to be compliant with privacy regulations. We use NIST privacy framework to make sure that every area is covered. And the result of the state of privacy assessment is that very quickly you have a roadmap for automation. You know where you're thin, where your risks are, and what you need to do. And then we provide the automation. Petra already mentioned in the beginning, DPM is all about end-to-end automation. And when it comes to managing consents for clinical trials, it means that end-to-end automation means that everything from collecting informed consents to the point of even anonymizing data at some point in future, everything is automated. Everything else, so privacy program for sure has the part where you need to take care of the culture, you need to do training and education of the employees, of the partners, of the HCPs. Also, there is the legal part, the legal services, the DPO services, the UK, EU representative services. So we can do that, all of that, we can provide it either directly or through the network of partners. But after we do the state of privacy assessment, we typically implement DPM. And sometimes we start with data mapping. And I think we are going to do one dedicated webinar for doing data discovery in the pharmaceutical industry. So what we have done, we have built machine learning models that can actually do the classification of any kind of data, structured or unstructured data, databases, documents, applications. And we have trained the models to understand healthcare data and to be able to do the classification of hundreds of different data domains and data types that are typically used in clinical trials. So moving on to the privacy program management, this is a set of tools for the privacy compliance and legal team where they need to keep the documentation and central management of records of processing activities and who you share data with, how your contracts look like, did you have any incidents, what are the risks for the rights and freedoms of individuals, and managing their access requests or rightly forgotten requests. The consent mastering, this is what we are going to drill down into. And finally, data removal, it's all about orchestrating the removal, anonymization, or deletion of data when you lose business and legal justification, which will also happen eventually. And it's also, you need to do that in order to be compliant. So when it comes to the time needed for implementation, consents are typically implemented in a couple of months, depending on the number of systems and the complexity of your processes. So DPM is the platform. This is the software platform with different modules. One of the modules is consent and preference management. Consent and preference management can be used standalone, so you don't need to use anything else in DPM. It is a software for itself. It is a product for itself. And consent and preference management provides this end-to-end automation. It is purpose-built for consent and preference management. It is a part master data management system, providing you with the capabilities to enrich data sets, to collect anything from the patients on the patient level, to add information about the study, products, and ICFs, informed consent forms, the purpose of why you are actually collecting consents and data. It is built on our proprietary technologies. It uses artificial intelligence. There are no third parties, no security risks. It is designed to encapsulate business logic, so really do understand how consent works. And the details are complex, but the process should be kept very simple. The software is very secured, so you also need to take care and take into account who is doing the ethical review, who is doing the legal review, who is able to change how consent purposes are managed, who is able to view patient-level consents, and so on. And we have two main entities. So the first one is consent purpose. Consent purpose defines why data is collected. It provides a container for all collected patient records. And users on the platform, so that will typically be your compliance, ethical, and ethical team. They will configure individual consent purpose and assign additional data, define identifiers for consent records, add and translate context logic language for the consent notice, so what is communicated with the patient. And the second entity is records of consent. And this is a collection of transactions. So these are, this is giving and withdrawing consents. And it's like a general ledger for consents. So you always need to know what is the current status. You need to know what the patient has consented for. The purposes need to be granular enough so that if you are collecting different categories of data or you are doing different types of processing, it should be granular. So patients should be able to give you consent for each of the purposes. And the power of having a central consent management system like DPM is to have a smart consent engine. So we will collect consents from different collection points, maybe from different regions in the world, even given in different languages. The consent engine's role is to cover any scenario that can happen. The basic scenarios like patient giving consent, a patient revoking consent, patient reconsenting for some reason. That means that they have previously given consent and you will again give consent transaction for the second or third time. Then any data changes that can happen for the patient and the study. Preferences may change, so individual preferences, maybe how they want to communicate with you. The consent engine will also resolve any duplicate transactions, any deactivations of the purpose, so ending the study. It also you need to take care of the records that we're collecting during the study. Managing historical consents, initially maybe loading everything you have distributed in different systems and databases. Managing retroactive consents, that means if you have any manual processes which with the HCPs, and in the same time you have direct communication with patients where they can withdraw their consents. So if you get any retroactive transactions, it needs to be resolved by the engine. So you always have to have the golden record, the master, the current state. And also the engine will manage consent record expiry. That means if for some purpose there is an expiry date for how long you are going to keep patient data and patient consents, it should be managed by the engine itself. And we store everything in the records of consent, in the given consents collection and revoked consents collection. Anything that is invalid at that point in time when it comes to patient transactions, so giving or withdrawing, will store temporarily and always check if the transaction for some reason now makes sense and it became valid transaction. So no manual work there, and that is very important when you are implementing a consent management system. The principle is to have the consent purpose with the general information, with managing the consent notice, with managing record identifiers, so patient level identifiers, managing any reference data, so any custom attributes, custom information you want to add to the consent purpose for example, for reporting purposes will be in the system. Assigning organizational unit, making sure that you control which users have right to access consent purposes and records. Changing versions, changing consent notices, changing language, changing who you share data with, and managing consent. This is all defined and configured on the consent purpose, which is the container for the records of consent. And then we have records of consent, which are collections of data subjects' preferences. So for each transaction, we have information about who consented, why, so for what purpose, what is the ICF they have read and signed, consented to, how was it collected, what is the channel of collection, when that happened, if there are personal data, if there are healthcare data that need to be stored in DPM, then they will be stored as a part of the record of consent. If there is any other data, so like I said, the model is fully flexible, so anything you need later on, you can store also. And this is just to give you a taste of the granularity and the modeling in the central records of consent repository. So I'll take an example of collecting consents for clinical trial 1. On the left side, you have the more granular option where you will, for example, process data for the trials for primary use, you will process imaging data, you will process omics data, you will do adverse event reporting eventually. So any of those can be modeled as an individual consent purpose. And then when patients are enrolled to the study and when you collect their consents, the records of consent will be stored for each of the purposes for primary use, imaging data, omics data, adverse event report. On the right side, there is different model, different granularity, where you will have only one purpose, and that will be collecting consents for clinical trial 1. And then patient preferences will be connected to the ICFs. So this is just to give you a taste that this is flexible. For sure, it depends on your processes, your needs, and what you actually want to do with the data later on, how we are going to model this. But the flexibility is very important because you can change eventually how you do it. And then one other important thing is that, one thing that you can manage with DPM is the life cycle of personal data. So you always start with collecting consents and data during patient enrollment in a clinical trial study. You will collect informed consents, you will collect maybe clinical data, maybe genetic data, maybe non-genetic data, samples. Then you will do the processing of data for the clinical trials, for the reporting, doing machine learning models, trying to find new purposes for existing drugs or combining drugs, or you will probably have ideas on how to use machine learning. And this is what we call the original purpose, the business process that you do. But then at some point you have the expiration of the local basis and you start retaining the data. This is called the data retention period or archiving. That can happen after an opt-out from a patient, or maybe your product is acquired by another company and so on. And finally, you need to be able to remove data at some point when you have no purpose, no justification for process. One of the things that we have done is we have included the data retention schedule in DPM, so you are able to find any rules when it comes to clinical trials on how long you need to keep the data. So we are working with Filers Keepers. They are our data provider and partner. And what we have is continually updated information about all the rules when it comes to how long you can actually keep patient data in your systems. And finally, I want to talk about responsible use of data, because when I say responsible use of data, I think about all the AI stuff that is going on right now. So everything is going wild, and everyone is trying to do as much as possible with AI, and it's all about having good data, right? From the technical perspective. But if we want to have patient in the center, if we want to think about patient, if we want to be ethical, and if we want to have a future where AI doesn't go wild, then we need to responsibly use data that we feed to the AI. So the final point I have is how you can responsibly use the data and why DPM helps. The responsible use of data for clinical trials is essential to protect privacy, confidentiality of study participants, and ensure that data is used ethically and effectively. And protecting the participant privacy, in clinical trial, the data must be protected to ensure the confidentiality of the patients. And identifying information should be removed or encrypted to protect their privacy. And you need to have data sharing policies. So policies about sharing clinical trial data, they should specify the terms and conditions for accessing and using the data, including limitations on data use and restrictions on data sharing. You should have data quality controls in place. And when it comes to responsible data use, so the trial data should be used for legitimate and ethical purposes, such as advancing scientific knowledge, improving patient outcomes, and informing public health policy. And data should not be misused or manipulated in any other way. And this is really, really very important. So at any point in time, you need to have a system that will actually be able to provide you in real time with information on what you are able to do with the data, what you have communicated with to the individuals. Has this been approved by your ethical board? And so on. So also informed consents, the patients must be informed of how data will be used, and their consent must be obtained for data sharing as well. And from regulatory compliance, for sure, pharmaceuticals and clinical trials are very heavily regulated. So again, you need to have controls in place. So finally, I want to say that with DPM, we have a lot of experience with consent management in different industries, but when it comes to clinical industry and clinical trials, I think for now, this has been the biggest challenge in the beginning, to make sure that we are doing things properly and covering all the needs of the big research companies. So we have been included by Gartner for the past 3 years in their market guide for consent and preference management as one of the top vendors in the world. Forrester is including us in their privacy management reports, and Quadrant is just about to publish the new report where we are positioned as the technology leader in the area. So I will start here with the presentation, and thank you very much for being so patient with me and listening to what I have to say. There is so much to say actually about the details and how things are done. If anything, please take away that you can feel free to get in touch. We can help you understand if you have any technical problems. We can do the state of privacy assessment, for example, very, very quickly. We can show you the product. We can explain how we do things. So this is, I think, our main message for today. So feel free to get in touch, and we will share the experience and be very happy if we can help you by providing the solution for automation of consent management and doing things in a compliant and ethical. So Petra, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marijan. Thank you for this presentation. Before we start the Q&A session, I will launch a short poll. You can click yes or no. It will be available for a few minutes and then I will turn it off. So we can start with the Q&A session with the first question we have. From your opinion, Marijan, and experience, why is it important to have all consents centrally managed and how it can be done in your solution?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. The answer to that question is very easy. At least in my head, it looks very simple, and that is if you want to properly manage what you do with data coming from the clinical trials, you need to have controls in place. To be able to have controls, you need to have data also available and be able to automate how data is shared based on the controls. So any requests coming from the data and AI teams about using data, or any requests coming from third parties or HCPs, they need to be approved. And software is the only way to go, using software. And once you approve the requests, you need to make sure that you know that you have the current status of consents, and you have them in one place, and everything is mastered and standardized, and you are using the same type of entities, same type of structure when providing data to others. So I think this is the main reason why you need to have everything in one place, and you need to have the low latency integration, and you need to have all the information, and you need to control from a security perspective who gets the access to data, when, and why.
Thank you, Marijan. The next question we have, although you answered this during the presentation, I will ask you again, can consents from different systems be centrally managed in your solution, and with how many systems you can integrate with?
Yeah, so I mean, in theory, with an unlimited number of systems, there is no real upper limit there. The idea is, yes, to be the central consent master, and to have integration with different consent collection points, which can be different types of consent forms through applications, websites, web forms, different systems used by HCPs, and so on. And they all, when they collect information from patients, they will all store it through the integration points in the central source of truth. Also, any consuming system that will use the data will go here to the central place, and we again need integration from that perspective. So yeah, the integration can be done with any number of systems to provide with the collection channels, with the consuming systems, and it will always provide current status and golden record for consent on the patient level.
Thank you. The next one is, how many languages do you support?
So when it comes to languages, really this is the content that is inputted through the integration. So there is again no limit on the languages. When we talk about user interface in DPM, we support all the main languages, and if there is any additional language, it's not a limitation actually. So any language can be added to DPM.
Thank you. The next one we have is, as a pharmaceutical company, what do we need to have in place to start with this kind of a solution?
You need to have problems in place. So I think when you understand the problems, then you are able to start. Because if you don't feel the problems of being able to responsibly use data and to be compliant and ethical, then even if you have the problems, then you are not ready to start. If you feel that you have problems, then the first thing you can do is talk to us, and we do the assessment part and give you the roadmap for the future. Then you can make the plannings and budgets and from technical standpoint. The only thing you need to have to implement consent management is actually doing the work when it comes to collecting consents from patients, having the process in place. But software will for sure help you make the process better and streamline the process and make everything more ethical and more complete.
Thank you. In your opinion, again, what are the biggest challenges and with pharma industry by now?
So the biggest challenges are that it's the ecosystem of one's regulatory ecosystem and the rules and the ethical ecosystem is very complex. So you need to think about many different things, and you need to have a very good and knowledgeable team, ethical and legal team. And from technical perspective, this is no different than maybe collecting marketing consent, GDPR marketing consents, or something of a kind. What is different though is that for clinical trials, you often need to have much more information in the database. Information about the studies, information about the products, information about the organizational structure, information about the countries, the languages, what is communicated with the patients. If there are any additional situations, such as you are not able to use data, if you previously have not published any papers, if you are working with a university or with a partner, when you can share data with them. So there's a lot of information that is on the consent purpose level, on the clinical trial level, that need to be stored and managed in the consent management platform. So this is a little bit different than, for example, marketing consents, which are pretty straightforward.
And the last one we have, Marijan, is there some kind of self-service where a person who gave consent see all of his consents and maybe revoke them?
Yeah, so we can provide a portal for the patient where they can actually see all the consents they've given and what is the current status, and they can manage them, so they can withdraw the consent, and they can also ask for their rights, like wanting to get the access to the data, or wanting to withdraw consent, or wanting to their data to be deleted. So this is something that we can provide through the privacy portal of DPM. So yeah, it's doable, and it's a very nice way, very clean way to communicate with patients when it comes to privacy and ethics, and to provide them with options.
Thank you, Marijan. That was the last question, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we hope to see you again at our next webinar, since we had the last webinar, and this is like the webinar series we will have within the Data Privacy Manager, where we'll cover new topics related to privacy. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to send me an email to discuss more about the solution or about the webinar. You have mine and Marijan's email here on the screen, and feel free to reach out if you need any additional information.